with proven track record across diverse industries. He's highly skilled in delivering cloud support services on AWS and Microsoft Azure, with expertise in incident response, IT service management, Windows Server administration and Linux administration, and also he's got experience within the Microsoft 365 space. He's a globally recognized cybersecurity specialist and a Microsoft certified trainer. So before we get started today, I would allow Precious quickly introduce himself and just take us through today's topic.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining and thank you for having me. My name is Precious, Precious Duru. I am presently a senior data security consultant in one of North America's biggest cybersecurity industry. I work for a company called Quorum Cyber that is based off of Scotland, with branches in the US, Canada, and in London. I've got an amazing experience around M365. I used to work for some banks in Nigeria before I moved to Tech Experts, which we all know, some of us, and then before I moved to work for some organizations outside of Nigeria. My experience has been in M365, 100% in, from Microsoft Defender XDR to Purview to Azure, and now everybody's chasing AI. I presently live in Canada, where I do my work remotely, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it is an honor to be the presenter for today. Today we will be focusing more on information protection. So we're going to be looking at what is information protection, how do we roll it out using Microsoft products, and what has been the impact, how does organizations around the world make use of information protection, and how do you roll it out? We're going to be looking at the technical aspects, business aspect, because one thing about technical folks is we're so much focused on the technical aspects, forgetting the business aspect, the impact of the product, whether it's positive or negative, is going to have on the business. So yeah, that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Just a quick question. Is it time for the presentation, or we still have some more rounds of introduction before? Because I've got some slides to go through, and I also got some hands-on skill demonstration to show everyone. So let me know when it's time for that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we'll just give our attendees the next 3 minutes before you get started with sharing your screen with the presentation for today.
Awesome.
So for those just joining in, welcome once again to today's session. Today we're going to be having Precious here, and he's going to be taking us through how organizations can better secure, classify, and protect sensitive information within various organizations. So just like I said earlier, if you're just joining in for the first time, you can please just quickly introduce yourself in the chat and let's know what your expectation is from this session. Okay, we have James here joining from Lagos. Kufre, you're welcome. Okay, Kufre, you have a question. I can see your hands up.
Okay, no, I just wanted to give a thumbs up when you called my name.
Okay, that's fine. We do have Lucky here, Ibrahim, and yeah, so I think I'll just drop a quick password. Okay, let me just quickly drop a quick reminder for others to join in. so we can continue with the presentation. Okay. So high pressures, I think you can share your screen now. You can start off with the presentation as we have more persons join in.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you everyone once again. Most of you have met me. We've worked together. We know each other a lot, and it's actually a pleasure to meet all of you here again. I'm going to be sharing my screen just to walk you through some things you need to know around information protection. Okay, just let me know if you can see my screen, everyone.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Awesome, good. And again, as I go through this, if you do have any question, right? Any question at all, in your hearts and minds that you want to bring up, please feel free to let me know. You can chime in, raise up your hand, using the icon with the teams, and then I will give it the opportunity to ask a question. Now, as you already know, Microsoft has evolved over the years, and we do remember back in the days when we do have what we call security and compliance center all in one, everything all in one, infused in one center. So we have the DLP policy, the security policy, everything in one. But as time goes on, Microsoft decided to specialize, kind of separate the two solutions, right? And now we have what we call the security, which is the security.microsoft.com, and we have what we call the compliance, which is now called the Microsoft Purview. Now, these two solutions have been separated. One is what we call XDR. So you have your Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps, and all of that. And now we have Microsoft Purview. And in Purview, we have over 10 solutions in Purview that they are doing different things all in Purview. So we have what we call the communication compliance policy. We have the compliance manager, the insider risk management policy. We have the retention, which is called the data lifecycle management. We have the records management, the PRIVAT, which is the privacy management, and the audit, the e-discovery, and so many other solutions, the data map, data catalog. All of these solutions are now grouped under the Microsoft Purview. Well, one of the solutions that stand out that is very important is called the information protection. Now, in the compliance ecosystem, Microsoft divided it into 4 major pillars. Please, I'm going to take you on a journey so you can understand the background of how Microsoft is evolving. 4 major pillars. We have what we call the know your data, protect your data, govern your data, and then prevent data loss. Now, these 4 pillars, this is where all of the 10 solutions or more in Purview, you must have to belong to one of them. It's either you are fixing the knowing your data, or you're fixing the prevent data loss, or protecting your data or governing your data. Okay. Now, in knowing your data, the solution that we have there is what we call data classification. So you identify your data. So in data classification, we have about 4 of them. We call them classifiers. I'm going to show you when I go into demo, right? We call them classifiers. 4 of them, one of them is what we call the sensitive information type. Microsoft has about 320 built-in sensitive information type, something like your credit card number, your debit card number, your passport, your NIN. All of these are classified to be sensitive information type. Remember, I'm still focusing on knowing your data, right? Now, also we have what we call the trainable classifier. That's looking at the context using machine learning to identify sensitive information. And they have what we call the exact data match. So the exact data match is where you do a one-on-one mapping of your data, right? Probably in Excel to identify it in Purview. And they have what we call the document fingerprinting. Right, the document fingerprinting is where you have a patent document, a customized document you want to protect. If anybody is sending any information outside the organization with this document, it's going to flag it. Now, you're going to use either one or more of these identifiers to create your solution or your policies, right? Now, that is for knowing your data. Now, in governing your data, you're going to talk about retention. How long do you want to keep your data in Purview? So an organization thinking of some compliance, they want to keep their data for 2 years, 3 years. Back in the days, we create retention in Exchange Admin Center before it was moved to the Compliance Center. So that is where we have the governing your data. Prevent data loss. Everybody here, you've heard about DLP. So DLP is all about, okay, if you're trying to share data outside the organization and it contains sensitive information, which is from the knowing your data, DLP will prevent or stop it from going out. And then we have what we call protect your data, which is the mainstay of our today's discussion. We call it information protection, meaning an organization have sensitive data, credit card, debit card, whatever they've classified to be sensitive, but they want to ensure that not everybody has access to it, right? How do you protect your data within your organization? That's what we call the protecting your data. And the solution in Purview that can give you that is information protection. And that is what we are focusing on today. Now, if I move on to that's 4 categories I mentioned. This is where we have know your data, prevent your data, prevent data loss, and govern your data. So these are the 4. If you go to Microsoft Learn, you might not see them categorically, but from experience, we've been able to kind of classify or categorize all of Microsoft Purview solution into these 4 major pillars. But for today, we are focusing on protecting your data. And in protecting your data, what solution in Purview do you need to do that? And what are the caveats? What are the rules, the do's and don'ts to deploy sensitivity label? One of them is, of course, which is the basics, license. You need to have the E5 license before you can go on to do that. And then we're going to see how do we go on to create and protect our data. Now, if I dive into the nitty-gritties and the technical aspects, I'm going to be looking at the current challenges we've got in modern solutions organization. We're going to look at label basics, the complexity, and of course, some examples for on how you can protect your data. As everybody knows, data security incident can happen anywhere. In some part of the world, it is very, very serious to have a data breach, right? And if it happens, an organization can lose from thousands of dollars to millions of dollars, right? Not only that, reputation, right? Your reputation will go down the drain, and it's going to be very difficult to build once it's gone. Now, how does data breach happen? Simple. End users. I mean, I always tell people the weakest link to all your security configuration is the end user. That's the weakest. You can deploy an amazing firewall rules, security policy, but if you don't train your user consistently and constantly, the they can undermine whatever policies you've deployed, right? The misuse of data within the organization is the weakest link. And when you give your users the power to do things, it becomes even more difficult. You need to set up things like automation, policies to ensure that whether the users like it or not, they have to follow the rules. All right. Users feel prey to phishing emails. You also know you receive emails and you click on the link and you supply your details. Data can be compromised at any time. Importantly, copying of files from your laptop to USB and it's gone. Right, that happens a lot, especially if somebody's leaving the organization. He goes in and downloads files from SharePoint and copies it to USB and goes with it. Right. Of course, there is a solution in Povy that can stop that, which we call endpoint DLP, or even what we call the insider risk management policy, can stop the exfiltration of data within the organization. The third one is what we call data exposure by negligent insider. As a security personnel, I love to watch security movies where we have FBI's high-tech science fiction movies. And what I've come to see and realize is that whenever there is a breach, someone internal is responsible. It doesn't happen automatically. There is someone inside, either intentionally or unintentionally, or probably the mistake. They do it and everybody is breached. So these are the three, I mean, there are more that can cause a possible data breach within the organization. Sorry, I'm going through the chat. Is my slide moving the way it should move? Is anybody seeing it? They seen only the first page.
No, the slide is moving.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'm talking globally. There are concerns around AI usage, right? I mean, everybody wants to go use AI, but the question is, organizations, are they ready to use AI? Microsoft says before an organization can adopt AI fully, they need to ensure that information protection is in place, data classification is defined, DLP policy is defined, because your AI prompt will obey your security policy. Example, if I go to ChatGPT and I upload a document to ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, give me an information, analyze this document for me. If I don't have access to that document, ChatGPT will come back and say, hey, we cannot access that document, right? And or I can go in and ask ChatGPT to summarize an email, or give me the meeting transcript. If there are classifications on information protection in place and I don't have the right permission to do that, to access it, ChatGPT will come back and say, sorry, I can access it, right? So insufficient visibility to the usage of AI apps. So a lot of organizations, they use Enterprise ChatGPT, they even use Gemini and other AI application without full visibility. Information protection can be or should be the first step before AI adoption or deployment. Is important, right? Things like data oversharing and of course non-compliance can lead to a possible data breach using AI within an organization if they are not ready. And what do we do as an organization? What is the next step? First of all, they need to discover and protect sensitive data. Now, when it comes to Purview, you see the first part that says know your data is the most important part. So last month we deployed DLP policy to over 5,000 employees. And before we started, the question was, what do you want to protect? What do you consider to be sensitive as an organization? Now remember, the organization is into drugs production. So they're going to be dealing with medical stuff, personal histories of people. So we're going to be talking about things like SSN, Social Security number. In Nigeria, we're going to talk about national identification number, those driver's license number, and all of that. They need to get that, write it down, and then that's what they want to protect. If they don't know, you need to find a way. You need to let them define it. And again, you can use the built-in sensitive information type, right? But if they think what Microsoft has is not good enough, you can create your own SIT. can create your own custom SIT, which is very, very more efficient than what Microsoft has. Right now for us, what I do is we create thousands of different SITs, customize just to, go get a specific data type, right? It takes time to build, but once you get it, it reduces the amount of false positives that policies will trigger, because right now it's doing the exact thing. Example I'm going to give you is you're creating a DRP policy or even sensitivity label to say if a document contains national insurance number, block it. And then there are probably 16-digit number, which is probably a receipt number. It's not actually a NIN. If that is not very accurate, it's going to block somebody from sending out a receipt to probably a partner or a customer, right? So those are some of the issues we've got around discovering and protecting your data within the organization. And also understand user activity context around the data and identify the risk. So again, how and what does users do in an organization, and how do we trace some of that? Microsoft Purview is so powerful that it gives you what we call user insights and tenant insights. So if you have E5 license, right, you can see your security risk. You can see the user activity level, the user risk level, and also the tenant risk level. You're going to start from there to understand how interactions happen within an organization. And then once that is done, of course, you prevent data from unauthorized users within the organization. Now, these are some of the things organizations can do before they can begin to deploy the real solution. Now, let's dive into the technical aspects. What is information protection and how can we roll it out within the organization? The solution that does it is called sensitivity labels. Now, let me give you an example. You go to ShopRite and you go to buy a pair of shoes, right? In ShopRite, you're going to see a pair of shoes. It's going to have what we call a label. And in the label, you're going to see the color of the shoe, most likely, the size of the shoe, probably the vendor, the manufacturer, and the price, yeah, right, and all of that. Now, that is a tag that is attached to that shoe, right? Now, what about documents, right? A document could be your Excel document, your Word document, your PowerPoint document, your PDF document. And let's say this document contains the employee's credit card information for their payment or their salary record. Now, how do you ensure that you can tag this document so that it is classified, so that not everybody can access it? Even when you access it, you have limited permission to do things like edit, view, read, update, and all of that. That is what sensitivity label is all about. You create it, you define the controls, you apply it to the document, and that's it. And one thing about this product is that it is persistent. So if you apply a label to an Excel document and you send it to Gmail, Yahoo Mail, that permission goes with the document wherever it lives. That's how powerful it is. So let's see and dive into some of the important aspects of sensitivity labels. Now, like I always say, before you begin to deploy sensitivity labels, you must know your data. And in knowing your data, I've talked about sensitive information type, trainable classifiers, exact data match, and document fingerprinting. You can use any of them or in combination to get that done. Another thing organization would do is what we call classification and handling policy. Now, this is where you get the executives or members of the IT team to say, hey, what are our policies and what are our standards, right? Here is where you're going to discuss how do you want to define our classification and handling policy? Do you want to define what we call label taxonomy? So taxonomy is more of what we call naming convention. So you're going to have things like public, private, internal, restricted, highly confidential. Now, the names go on and on, But again, you define this and align it with the company's standards and policy, right? Now, once you have that defined, you can now go on and set what we call controls. Remember, in the shoe analogy that I gave, the label can be there, but it's blank. So if I go to buy a shoe and I have a label and there's nothing written on the label, I have to go meet the salesperson and say, hey, what is the price of this label? So one is to define the label, which could be public, private, internal, and highly confidential. The next is to define the controls that the label will apply. Controls could be the permissions, the access, the controls, the encryption, and so much more you can apply to the label. So first of all, know your data, work with the organization to understand what we call their classification handling policy, and then you can define the controls. So let's see how these things work sequentially. So this is what we call the taxonomy, so you can see, right? So here, again, this is an example. I have about 4 labels. Right now, I have an organization I'm deploying the label for, and they have about 4 of them: public, internal, confidential, and highly confidential. Now, the name is important because it tells and suggests what it can do. So here, I have what we call public, business, confidential, and highly confidential. If I'm working with an organization, I say, okay, if this is your taxonomy or your naming convention, what do you classify to be public? As an organization, what do you call public? What document can be public? Things like newsletter, anything that can be sent outside the organization without any financial loss or impacts, we can classify it to be public, right? Go to business. What do you classify to be business? Contracts, MOM, Memorandum of Understanding, lease agreements, policies, whatever, right? These can be classified to be business. And I go to confidential. Confidential could be PII information. Anything we don't want to let go or let people see, that can be confidential. Things that can cause litigation, people can sue us to courts if it's been released, and all of that will put them under confidential. And then talk about highly confidential. Again, this is where we're going to ensure that anything classified to be highly confidential must be encrypted with access control. Remember, as you go from left to right, the access control restriction increases, right? That is kind of the idea when you are defining your taxonomy. Now, when we talk about labels, you can apply labels to Office apps, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, PDF, and all of that can be applied. You can apply what we call encryption. I'm going to show you that when I go into the demonstration soon enough, right? What we call encryption is what we call access control. Who can access this document if the label is applied to it? You can apply things like visual markings. Like if you go to a library and you want to go probably read a book, you're going to see things like not for sale, right? Those are what we call visual markings, right? They're kind of underlined behind the document that you can see. You can make changes to it just to tell you that this is a confidential document. I can do things like automation. So I can apply a label to a document based on the content of the document. Also, labels can be applied to containers. Like, SharePoint site is a container, right? That contains the files, the pages. Exchange mailbox is a container, right? OneDrive is a container. So you can apply labels to container as well. Now, the controls that you apply to containers are not the same controls you apply to Office items like Excel and Word. In Excel, you can do things like edit, delete, copy and paste. But in the SharePoint side, what can you do? Mostly change it from different user types like member to owner to visitor and all of that, right? So the different controls are different based on the content that the label can be applied to. So that is what we do with sensitivity label taxonomy and defining the data classification handling policy. Once that is done, the next thing you want to do is to expand your classification metrics. So here is based on the taxonomy that you've been defined remember, you need to work with the customer. Again, sensitivity label or information protection is, we call it tier 1 deployment because it has to do with the entire organization. It can take from a month to 6 months for you to deploy it. And once it's effectively deployed, it reduces the risk to up to 70% from what we've seen. Right. Now, this is what we call the classification metrics. In the classification metrics, as you can see, sorry, is that a question or somebody? Hello, James? Okay. All right, so here we have public. Yes, Emmanuel, go for it. Hello, Emmanuel, I can see your hand raised up.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yes, good. So, thank you for the presentation. So, my question is, you made mention of that the labels can be applied to both File, SharePoint, OneDrive. So, my question is, what's the difference between the behavior of how the label works when it comes to File and also when it comes to SharePoint sites, like SharePoint sites on OneDrive? Because the SharePoint site is more like a container. Doesn't mean that if you apply a label to the container, all the files under that, all the files under that SharePoint, inside that SharePoint, they become that particular label automatically, or so how does it? What's the behavior between the two?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. So when you apply a label to a file and the label is now inside, let's say, a SharePoint site, right? The behavior of a container is different from the behavior of the item. Now, for the container, what sensitivity label does to SharePoint site is to change the privacy settings. So here we have in SharePoint site, we have about 3 of them: the owner permission, right? The member and the visitor. I have what we call private, public, and is it shared or internal that we have now, or standard, right? With sensitivity label, when you define it and apply it to container, right, it overrides the default privacy setting for that particular SharePoint site. Let's say a SharePoint site by default is public, right? If you apply a label that is private, it goes in there and changes that public to private. That's how it works for containers. For items like files and Word and Excel document, if you apply a label to a document, there are 2 things you can do. There's what we call user-defined permissions and label-defined permissions. The user-defined permission is where you give the users the power to assign different permissions to the document, like read, write, copy, co-owner, owner, and edit. But if you define the permission in the label, this is where you say, no matter what happens, this is the permission that this document is going to have. The same thing, reader, owner, editor, and all of that, right? So those are the 2 different behavior for a container and an item labeled document. Did I answer your question?
Sorry, if I guess it correctly. So let's say you label a file as maybe public, and then it's being put. Okay, let me say you label a file as maybe confidential, and then you the file was uploaded to a SharePoint site as a public label. So does that mean that the file will automatically be labeled as public, even though it has higher sensitivity than public?
Okay. Now, what happens to the label document is not a function of the name, it's a function of the control. The name is what we call taxonomy. The actual action that happens is the control you put behind the taxonomy. So I can go in and create a label called public, but in that public, I'm doing a different thing. That's why we say let the label name do exactly what it's supposed to do, right? Now, in SharePoint sites, we have what we call privacy settings in SharePoint sites. There are about 3 of them: public, private and I think it's public and private. Yeah. Now, when you are creating a label for files, because when you're creating a label, that's what we call scope. So either you apply it to files and emails, apply it to SharePoint sites, Teams sites. The behavior, when you configure it to apply to files and emails, they are different when you apply it to Teams sites and SharePoint sites. Let me quickly show you that so that you can have a clear understanding of what I mean. I'm going to bring up my test tenants, and that is the admin center, and we have what we call Purview. We go to Microsoft Purview, and we go to, just going to sign in here quickly. So go to Purview, and by the way, this is where we have all of the solutions I mentioned. Here we have more than 10 of them. So you can see the communication compliance, compliance manager, and all of that. But we are focusing on information protection. We go into information protection. And the information protection have what we call sensitivity labels. Click on that. If you click on that, this is where you have the power to create a label. Now, let me say I want to create a label, call it whatever name, public, internal, or private. I have so many labels here created, but I'm going to create a new one for the purpose of this demonstration. Now, here is the name of the label, which is what the users, the administrators will see within the Purview ecosystem. I can call it public _01 because I do have public label there again. Here is the display name that the users will see. I will also bring up an example for you because I have a Word document. I've published some labels here in this tenant. So you see the end user experience for some of these label. So as I'm doing the admin side of things, I will be showing the end user experience as well. So here, it's important for you to know that if you create a label, right, the tenant where you are creating the label, the users must be signed in. That's when they will see it. As you can see, that is the trainer's account that I'm using. So any label I create there and I publish to this account becomes visible here. Now, if you look at this, you see there's an icon in the menu for Word. The same thing happens to Excel and other Office apps. You see sensitivity label. Now you see all the labels I've created and published, they all appear here. Now, pay attention to the color coding. You can change that or select that when you're creating your label. And also pay attention to each of the label has a key, some of them. The key means that this label is doing what we call an encryption or access control in it. If I select the first one, watch and see what's going to happen. Look at the bottom of my screen. It's retrieving what we call the rights management policies or settings from the server, which is hosted in Microsoft Cloud. If it retrieves that, it's now going to apply whatever configuration that I've done behind the scene. Now look at, I have not for sale, not for sale. That is what we call virtual marking. I'm going to show you where and how to configure it. But now, you see what I can do here is if I come in here, I can change the sensitivity label to something else. Now, what this label is doing is you can see view permissions. Here, this label, as I've applied it to this document, has the permission view, edit, copy, print, save, export, and all of that. This is because when I was creating the label, I gave it the permission myself as an administrator. But let me see if I have a label that says user-defined permission. I come in here and I go to, let me see which one has the user-defined. Yep, hold on. Let me see if I can see. Here we go. This is the user-defined permission. Now this is you as the user of this document. Say, okay, I want to give these people viewer permission to my document, right? I can change it to restricted. I can change it to editor and all of that or more options. Now, this is how it behaves if you have the label published to files and emails, all right? But if you have it published to Teams and SharePoint, it behaves separately. So let's go back to label creation so I can show you. Here, I'm going to also put the display name to be the same thing for now. This is the priority, meaning that if two labels have the same configuration, the one with the highest priority will be applied. And this is a description for users. This is what the user will see if they go in and hover their mouse. So if I come in here and I hover my mouse here, you can see that test is a description there. Some of them do not have description. Yeah, you can see that is what a description will do for you. So here, whatever you type in here, that is what the user will see. I just want you to see the admin side of things and the end user side of things as well. So here I'm going to say workshop, whatever. And then this is a description for admin, not very important. And this is where you put your color code if you want to change the color as well. Now click on next. Now this is what you have, the scope. Now files, emails, meetings, and groups. So group and site is for SharePoint, Microsoft 365 group. Now pay close attention and see, I'm going to take off this. You see what the label would do if it's applied to Microsoft 365 group, SharePoint sites, team sites, and all. Click on next. What can you do here? Hold on, let me see if I can take off. Yes, asking me for, I need to have the Teams premium license. Unfortunately, for me to configure that, it's not going to work. I need to switch to the other tenant that has that. But if I go to files and emails, now I can put in what we call control access and apply content marking. Click on next. Now, this is where the configuration happens. If I had seen that of Teams and SharePoint site, I won't see this configuration. What I'm going to see is the ability to change it to from private to public. Now, this configuration is the actual settings that be applied to the document, not the name of the label. I can go back and change the label to be Nigeria. Doesn't matter. What matters is the configuration behind the name. Now, for SharePoint sites, you won't see all of these edit permission because SharePoint site does not have those options for the settings. Now, here is where you have what we call the label permission and ability to give the users the power to assign permission to the document. When you come in here, we have what we call assign now. So this is what we call it label permission because this is assigning the permission from the purview dashboard. If I say let users decide, this is where I say once I publish this label, users will have the power to apply the labels the way they deem fit by changing the configuration as well. Now, did I answer your question? Did I clarify your question?
Some extent, but let's just continue. Maybe
yeah, probably. I will show you what happens if a label is applied to a SharePoint site. I'm going to see if I have a SharePoint. Let me see if I have a SharePoint site here. Go to SharePoint. Let's see if I can. I don't know if I publish a label to SharePoint, but let's see if I have anyone. If I go to SharePoint and try to create a SharePoint, even in Teams, when you're creating a Teams meeting, it also gives you the option to apply a label. Let me see if I have something like that as well. 1 second, calendar. Okay, so here is all right. So this is another example for Teams. So this is a Teams meetings I'm trying to schedule, right? You see this icon here, sensitivity, right? It is grayed out because for you to use sensitivity label for Teams, you need to have what we call the Teams premium license. And what it's going to be doing for you is going to be different from what the emails and the files will do for you, right? Let me see if I also have SharePoint. So if I come to SharePoint site, I try to create a SharePoint site. Let me see if I have the, I'm going to create a communication site for now. Let me select a template. I don't have anyone, so let me pick up this one. Let me use this template for now. Give it a name. So give it a name, give it an owner. I'm not very sure if I've published any label to SharePoint. Yeah, here we go. So you see this is the sensitivity label that you can apply. Now, what this is gonna do is, if I apply this sensitivity label, right, is all about changing the configuration settings from private to public and all of that. So you don't have the power to do edit, view, and read only. Okay, let's continue. As we continue, probably some of these will be clear and clarified. Any other question from any other person, please, before I make progress? But I'm almost close to the end of the presentation. Okay, so here is where you define your classification metrics, and you have the public, business, confidential, highly confidential. Again, this is the example I'm using. You can use anything of your choice. It's up to you. And then you can define what is public to you, what is business to you, policies, training, and what is confidential to you could be PII, networking, files, financial details, and whatever that is highly confidential, which is very, very highly sensitive business information that should not leave the organization. Define that, and then this is where you now define your controls. I think this will now give us some understanding based on the question you've asked. When you are defining the controls you can define is a function of the scope. So here, the scope is for files and other data assets, right? Now, for the scope, I have things like control access, content marking. So the control access is where you define things like assign permission now, which is the label permission, and the user permission, which is where the user will decide what permission they want to give. Now here we have things like access expires. What this is going to do for you when the label is applied is, if a label is applied to a document and you say the access is going to expire within this specific time, right? This is an example of what I mean, right? I'm going to say assign permission now. I will see things like user access to content expires. What this is going to do for you is, when you say never, meaning the user will continuously have access. When you say on this specific date, the user access is going to completely shut down. Or you can say number of days after the label is applied. You can also go on to say offline access, meaning here, if somebody goes offline for a specific period of days, they have to re-authenticate again before they can access the document, right? You can do all of that. You can also do things like permissions, and this is where we have different groups. So this is for all users in your organization, and this is for guests and external users. So if I select this is for everybody within the organization that has the pristineprints.microsoft.com domain as the suffix, and this is for guest people with Gmail, Yahoo Mail, whatever guest you've got. And here you can go as far as to select specific groups or specific emails if you want to. You can also do things like giving specific permission to the specific groups. So here I have authenticated users for external guests. I can say these people should only have this permission. I want them to have only viewer permission or restricted editor, or I can customize it and select the level of permissions that you want to assign to guest users within your tenant. And then for your main users, you can give them co-author or can give them co-owner. Go through the permissions that are available per category and know what applies to you, right? Once you're done, you click on save and you can click on next. We have things like additional security. Can you provide like dynamic watermarking? The dynamic watermarking is where if the user opens a document and applies the label, their UPN will be appended to the document. So it becomes tied to their name. For double encryption, if you're using Azure Key Vault for double encryption, you want to provide your keys to encrypt the document. That is what we call advanced encryption or access control for sensitivity label. The organizations really do that, but it is there for a highly restrictive document. Then you click on next, provide the valid okay, sorry, I need to say content expires. So I'm going to say never for now. I'm going to say never for now. And then this is where you put your content marking. You saw those not for sale in the Word document. This is where you put them. Pretty easy and straightforward. Put your name and say not for sale. And then you select it and change the font size, the color, the position where you want it to be, and then you click on save. You can also put the header or the footer, which appears at the top and bottom of the document. If you want to do so, that is all you need to do here. And once it's published, the users will receive it and they cannot change it. Click on next. Now, this is very important. This is where we have what we call auto-labeling of files. Now, there are times when you create a file, and in the file, you have things like your NIN, your driver's license number. If that is very important to an organization, you can recommend and say, hey, whenever you create a document this sensitive, apply the label to them. So you can do things like recommend the label or automatically apply the label. So what's going to happen here is, if I select this is more like if you've ever created DLP policy is something like that. You're going to say, add a condition if the content of the document you're creating contains sensitive information type like credit card. I'm just going to use credit card for now, right? Add it. Now, this is what we call confidence level and instance. Instance simply means how many instances of the credit card will be in that document to flag it. So here, you can say 1 to any, or depending if you want to do what we call low, medium, and high volume alerts, high volume severity alert, you can change the instant count if you want to. And now you can decide to say what happens next if that conditions are met, automatically apply the label, or recommend that the user apply the label. I'm going to switch over to show you what happened, because if I create this label, it's going to take about 30 to 1 hour to be published, and that will go beyond the timing of these workshops. So I have what we call an animated demonstration to show you the end user experience, because from experience, if I'm delivering the training, the customer will always say, can I see what happens if the user applies it? So I'm going to switch all the way down. I'm going to come back to this classification soon enough. I'm going to switch all the way down to show you what happens to what is the impact quickly, and then I'm going to come back. So these are examples I've put together to show you. So here is an example. Somebody is creating an Excel document and content. You can see these are, again, we use ChatGPT to generate all of these numbers. They're not real. And now this guy is applying the label that is good. He's doing what we call manual application. So he's naming the file, the name of the file, and now he's applying the label to be public or confidential or highly confidential or secret, depending on the classification taxonomy. And now this is the permission that we apply to this label. You can see all the permissions, and he clicks on save. And now once he saves it and then sends it out, that permission remains all the way. Now, another one is where we have, sorry, I need to go back here. Let me see. Yeah, this is the other one. Here we go. So this is an example of automation, right? Here, because of what the user is typing, it is recommended that he applies the label, right? Because of the content of the document, automatically, you see a pop-up like a tooltip or policy tip saying, because of what you do, you can see your organization recommends that you apply sensitivity label to it. If you don't do that, you cannot proceed. That is the end user experience when you have auto labeling in place for your files. It also happens to, can do that as well for emails. So here is somebody sending an email, to Outlook account and the email contains employee records or information, right? If you try to attach that information, what's going to happen is you can see your organization recommends that you classify or apply the label. So auto labeling can be applied to Word document, Excel document, and also can be applied to emails as well. So you can see the impact or how it applies to these will be different from that of SharePoint and OneDrive. Now, if we move away to another one, this is also another example of auto labeling, right? Here, because of the content of all of these Excel documents, it's being recommended that you apply it. And if you want to downgrade it or remove it, there is a business justification you need to put in there before you can remove the label from that document, right? Again, we have another example of, sorry, I think I removed that. I had an example for endpoint for SharePoint and OneDrive. I took that away because it's going to be a lot for us to deal with. Now, switching over to the demo or the configuration, we have what is the end user experience when you put in auto labeling. As you can see, that is the end user experience. And here you can see automatically apply the label, or you recommend that the user applies the label. And then you click on next. Now, here we go. So you see these groups and sites. This is the exact thing I was talking about, the experience when you apply it or configure it for SharePoint and Teams. It changes the privacy. It changes the external sharing for that SharePoint sites, and for Teams, it changes this discoverability, who can discover, who can chat in Teams and all of that, because they all have different metadata as an object in M365. Just because I didn't select it in scope, that's why they're all graded for me. I can't configure it. But if I go back and see, I can't even select it because I do need to have Teams Premium license to enable that. If I go back here, I can do emails, meetings, groups, and now let's see what we can do. Yeah, I've done this one, move on. We've done this one, we've done the content marking, we've done the auto labeling. Now, this is what happens when you define the protection for groups and sites. So here we have privacy, external sharing if you want to, Teams discoverability, but let's switch and stick to with privacy and external user access. Next here, you can see public, private, and none. Now, if a team site has public already and you apply it to public, it sticks with public. If a team site has private and you apply public, it changes it from private to public. What that means is the sensitivity label settings override whatever policy, whatever privacy settings the default team site or SharePoint site would have if you enable that. You can also talk about how external users can be added to your organization M365 group if you want to. Click on next. That's all you need to do. You create the label. Now, this is one part. This is where the administrator would do and complete his assignment. The other part is where you publish it to the entire organization, to some group of people, or to some department. What we always recommend is when you're creating sensitivity label information protection, do what we call a phased rollout, right? Get a group, apply it to a group, and then see the impact with, we call it functional testing, before you can roll it out to the entire organization. At this point right now, we can then switch over to sensitivity label and then say, publish the label. Now here, you're going to choose the label you want to publish, and then I'm going to go all the way down to select public_01. Add it to the list and click on next. Here is admin unit if you are in education sector where you have different departments, but for now, we're going to use food directory. Click on next, and this is where it is important. Here is any group or users you select here, right, will only see the label. If they are not part of this group, they cannot see the label. Right? If you're not part of this group, they cannot see the label. So this is where you select the groups you want to apply. We recommend you select specific groups for your testing. And then once that is done, you incrementally add the group to reduce what we call business impact. So for me, I have few users here. I'm just going to do this for all. Click on next. Now, policy setting. Users must provide justification to remove the label. If you select this, what happens is, if a label is applied to a document and you want to downgrade it or remove it, you must provide business justification. And if that is done, you go to what we call Activity Explorer. I know I have limited time to talk so much about Purview, right? Activity Explorer shows you every single activity that you do within label, right? So here, if you go back to, let me see if I can show you that. Purview. So whenever you create a label and publish it and you want to see the impact, the first place you want to go to is your Activity Explorer. If you go to Activity Explorer under Information Protection Explorer, click on Activity Explorer, you will see everything. This includes both DLP activity and so much more. So here, so it's still loading. No data, that's strange. Yeah, but here, this is where you see all those activities that you want to see to know the impact, if it's working or not. Now, the other one is require a user to apply a label to the email. So here it's important you don't want to do this, because if you do this, whatever email and file that has been created, they must apply the label. It does have what we call business impact. Especially, I'm trying to send an email to a colleague and just benign, harmless email, and all of a sudden you're asking me to label it for what? So you don't want to use this one as well. Require users to apply it to Power BI content. If you scope it to Power BI content, then in Power BI where we have those visuals and workspaces, you need to apply the label there. Here is to provide users with a link, all right? I don't think if I have that to show you, but if you select that, if you come to sensitivity label, there is an icon that appears here called help, right? So here is where the users can click, and then it's going to tell them more about sensitivity label. You can go copy Microsoft Learn talking about sensitivity label and paste it all here. It will be, just show you, copy this one, come in here, paste the link there. Once I publish this, it's going to appear there. Now click on next. Here is apply a default label to document. Now there are times when organizations want to apply default labels to document, especially if they have a label that is called internal, or let's say, yeah. So the label is configured in such a way it has what we call watermarking, the logo of the organization, the information of the organization. So they want to ensure that every document within their tenant has that. You can apply that as a default if they want. So I can decide to say, apply this to be default, and it's going to apply for me. Let me show you. I have a default label that I presently have within my tenant. If I go to Excel, whenever I create an Excel document, automatically that label is applied to that. So this is an example of what I mean. So this is an Excel document. If I click on that, you're going to see at the top, protect office document. I didn't select that. It's from my policy. So I do a lot of testing to see how this product functions. So here, that is an automatic label that was applied when I created the sensitive label. I can change it if I want to, but automatically every office file I create, we have that label protect office document applied to it. So that is where I set it up, and that is where I can do it. I'm going to change this to none because I have one already. So here you can apply the default label to emails as well. So when you're creating an email, automatically the label can apply if you want to. Yeah, all of these are default application when you don't want users to decide what happens, but be mindful of the impact when you create the default label to different locations within your organization. So I'm going to set all of this to none, to Viva Engage for now. That is a new one, is in preview. That's good to know. I don't know how many persons that use Viva right now. Anybody using Viva? The last time I used Viva was 5 years ago. I don't know what happens there. Does anybody use Viva right now?
No, I currently don't.
Okay, cool. All right, you can apply that to, no, okay, cool. Now you can also apply that to Power BI, which is a very powerful tool for business intelligence. And then once you're done, you give it a name, whatever name is fine. Can give it the same name as the label. It doesn't really have any impact whatsoever. But again, in an organization, we love consistency and professionalism. Give it a name that suggests what it does, and then you put a description there, and then you click on next and submit. So that's what happens. Microsoft says it takes about 24 hours for this to be published, but from experience, within 30 minutes, we should be seeing this label available across the scopes where it's being published. Yeah, it's 24 hours, but even before the end of the session, we will see that. Now, before I wrap up, right, I also want to give you some useful tips that you should think about or you can apply when you are deploying sensitivity label, which I've added to these slides. Yeah, so I was talking about the scope, and the impact depending on the scope, what you can do based on the scope. So for files and other data assets, these are the things you can do on files, right? Things like header and footer, watermark, dynamic encryption. You can enable that as well. You can enable auto labeling for files and other data assets. Now, if you move away there and go to emails, you can see a few things will change here. In the email, it does the same thing as the files, right? But just few changes. Now you have header and footer there. Now here, we'll have do not forward and encrypt. What this is going to do for you is, if you apply a label that says do not forward, if I receive the email, the option to forward to print is grayed out for me completely. I cannot forward the email, I cannot print the email. If you say encrypt, I send the email, if I click on it, right, I will be asked to provide a six-digit code, more like an authentication to access the document or the attachments. So that's what happens if you select encrypt. And then auto labeling, we've gone through that. You recommend or you automatically apply based on the content of the document. Now, what we did here is, again, based on the severity, or will I say the confidentiality of your documents, you want to apply these controls if you have highly confidential labels. So you can see that's what we say, start from the least control or least restrictive to high restrictive document, so you can apply the full controls to them. Now, if we move to groups and sites, watch and see closely, all of these options like office access, offline access, they're all gone. Now, for groups and sites, you can only see privacy and user and external user access. Things like change the privacy from public, private, and none. External sharing and conditional access can also be enforced using sensitivity label. From experience, we recommend people to use Entra ID conditional access policy for this one. It's more efficient and effective rather than the sensitivity label. For teams, here you can say who can discover your teams, who can enforce things like who can chat in Teams. Again, we recommend you try to use Teams policy in Teams Admin Center for that. And then, but again, sensitivity label information protection can highly do that for you. For Teams chat, again, the settings are different. Here, if you apply a label to Teams chats, what you're going to be doing is who can bypass the lobby. So have you seen when you join a team meeting that you are not a member of the organization, you're going to be in the lobby and somebody has to let you in, right? You can change that in, of course, team settings in Microsoft 365 Teams Admin Center, or you can use sensitive label to do that. Who can present? The organizer or everybody can present. Who can record and transcribe? Who can automatically record? These are things you can change or allow when you use sensitivity label. But again, you can do this in Teams Admin Center. So we always recommend use Teams Admin Center because it's more comprehensive, it's more robust, and it's more suited for that. And then we have also encryption, things like when the video can be encrypted, the audio can be encrypted. You can also apply watermarking. Have you seen recently when you join Teams in a standard organization, the background is now their logo? That is what they do. They're using the Teams sensitive label to apply their logo behind the scene. Again, it's a form of sales, branding, and all of that. Ability to copy when the meeting is going on. So here everybody can paste and copy, but you can use sensitive label to say guests cannot copy. Again, think about protection. So if I'm presenting to external public audience, I turn off the copying and pasting, right? You can't copy, you can't paste so that you don't take anything sensitive from that meeting. Again, that is the whole idea of information protection, to reduce oversharing, data leakage, and data exfiltration. All right. Any question? I know any questions so far from anybody before I go to the next one quickly?
We have a question from Emmanuel.
Yes, please go for it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Emmanuel.
Yes. So I want to ask, you made mention of labeling. So yes, I know that if you're trying to set up a document, if you're trying to create a document and you use some certain keywords, it's automatically labeled to document. So I want to ask, so what about files that are at rest, especially maybe you already have the files before you configure these sensitivity labels, and those files are in SharePoint sites, and maybe they're not being actively used, but you want to label those files. So does the auto labeling actually work on files that are at rest, especially maybe on your OneDrive, your SharePoint, or just anywhere at rest? Does it actually, or do you have to actually open those files before they are being automatically labeled?
That is a very good question. So if you do automatic labeling, I actually tested that in my test environment. The files that are at rest will not receive the auto labeling only when you open it. That's a very good question, because someone asked me that question the other time when we were talking about auto labeling. So when you publish auto labeling to files, all the files in SharePoint, OneDrive, they will not receive that label until when you open them. Then when you open them, they receive the label, and when you save them, they keep the label. That's the straightforward answer. I tested it. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a follow-up question to that, Abdulsalam, because if you check the portal, there are two sites where you have auto labeling while creating the sensitivity labels, and also auto labeling policies. So are they actually the same, or are they different? Do they apply in different ways?
Okay, good question. Now, there's what we call client-side labeling, and what we call service-side labeling in information protection. Now, label publishing policy is where you create a policy to publish the sensitivity label you've created. Auto labeling is where you simulate the impact of the labels you are creating, right? Here, what you're doing can only apply to SharePoint and Teams, right? So when you create I do have an exchange. So what you do here is, when you create an auto labeling, what happens right now, you're saying, I want you to go to all my, again, the one I showed you is what we call the client side information protection. That's where it applies to Office documents, right, in your device, on your device. So in that case, until you open it, it will not apply. But when you click auto labeling policy, which is what we call the service side, right? In the service side, which is where you have SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams, which is all online, when you create it, what's going to happen is it's retrospectively go to your SharePoint site and begin to do what we call crawling. If you do SharePoint, that's what we call crawling. It crawls and go to check in your data at rest, does any document within that SharePoint site meet these conditions? Because you're going to put a condition here, and the condition is going to say, if the content in SharePoint and OneDrive contains these things, apply this label to them. So here, that is what we call this is the labels I've just published. So I can select this one and say, and I have to put a condition. So I'm going to click on next. So it applies to email, SharePoint site, and OneDrive. Now I have to put a rule. So I can create one rule for the three of them, or I can create three rules for each, one rule for each of them, or I create three rules individually for that. So here, in this case, what is going to happen here is, I'm going to say, if the content in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange contains this, put in whatever credit card information you want to, right? Apply that label. Now that is what we call the service side labeling and have the client side label. They are two different things and they operate differently. Did I answer your question?
Okay, that's answered my question. So that means that the only way you can label the documents, you can't label. So the thing is that you can't label documents at rest. You must actually open them before it can open them.
That's correct. So Ibrahim said, in a situation where encryption options are used in email, how will the recipient get the access code? So it's going to be sent to the email that was selected when you are sending it to them. So let's say I am sending an email to precious@gmail.com or yahoo.com. Remember, it doesn't work it works for external users. So if they click on it, you're going to see this message is encrypted with what we call the Microsoft message encryption. If you click on it, it's going to send them to another page, and then they have to put in the code. The code will be sent to the same email. So if they don't have access, of course, they should have access to the email because they received the email. So it be sent to the email address that was imputed when the sender was sending the encrypted document to them. Ibrahim, did that answer your question?
Sure, thanks.
And Mercy said, I've noticed when we send admin password to Teams, DLP triggers. How do we configure that? Okay, so this is a little bit different. In DLP, there's what we call conditions, rules, right? So I do believe that in your organization, your administrator must have selected some SITs called user login credentials, password, and all of those stuff, and says whenever it is scoped to Teams, so if I go to Teams and send things like that, it's going to trigger DLP policy. That is not configured in information protection. Probably Otoje can set up another session where we'll talk about DLP, and then you're going to see how those DLP policies work in terms of the rule sets and what triggers the policy. So that is different, a little bit different from what we are discussing. DLP policy is responsible for that because the condition of your team chat, the content contains either password or user login details, and it flags it. Messi, did I answer your question? Okay, what is the impact of sensitive label to real-life organization? Impactful. So if you say impact, we're going to ask if it's negative impact or positive impact. If it's negative impact, it can shut down an organization if it's not configured very well. If it's positive impact, it can reduce data oversharing, data exposure, data exfiltration, in the sense that whenever you decide who has access to what, right? Who has access to documents and files and who can open it and who cannot. So we need to know if it's negative impact or positive impact. Ezra, did I answer your question? Okay, cool. Keep those questions coming. That is very good. Now, I'm going to move to, let me see. Welcome. So I've talked about label publishing. I'm just going to move past that. It simply means you publish the label to your group of choice. All right. Then I've also talked about auto labeling. So this is where you decide based on some conditions. So if the content if the content is shared, if the file extension is this, you can apply the label. So we have two types of auto labeling services, as you can see. User interaction with emails and documents defined by the label configuration as previously covered. right? And here we go. I think this is the question Emmanuel was asking. And then we have what we call scan job. M to scan historical M365 contents without the need of user interaction. So you can do both of them based on your need, and it's going to apply the label automatically. Lastly, before we wrap up and I hand over to my colleagues, there is also what we call the Microsoft Information Protection Scanner. If an organization ever wants to protect, documents on premises, right? They have file servers where they have their files on premises. I used to work in a bank where we just have a laptop, and whenever we want to do anything, a configuration, we have to log on to the file server, download the file or the application and run it. So here you can do what we call information protection scanner. It is mainly for on-premises. So it has nothing to do with the cloud. So it is a lot more technical to set up because you're going to set up what we call a node, set up what we call a database, install the information protection scanner on the node, set up what we call a scan job, set up the settings, and initialize the scan. And once the scan starts, it deploys the same thing that happens in the cloud. It does it the same on premises. But now the interaction is powered by a connector called the information protection scanner. If you've ever been in M365 for some time, you should know that whenever there's a connection between on-premises and the cloud, there's always a connector, right? Talk about Entra ID, talk about when you're Defender for Endpoint, you need to set up and install an agent. Talk about Defender for Cloud, you need to install the agent as well. So whenever there is any interaction between cloud and on-premises, there is either an agent or a connector to interface between them. So here, for on-premises file shares, for SMB files, for network access storage files, for SharePoint server on premises, if you want to protect those documents on premises, you need to use the Microsoft Information Protection Scanner. I don't have all the time to do that. It takes a lot to set that up, so I won't go into details, but just for your information, in case anybody asks you if there's any interaction between on premises and the cloud in terms of Microsoft Information Protection. And that's all I wanted to share with you today. I've gone through this example before now, so I won't go through that again. Now, I'm going to use a few minutes I have to answer any question of your choice around Purview Information Protection. Any question from anybody?
Yeah, none.
Awesome. I'm going to hand over to you, Rafiah, and thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much for that wonderful session. It's been an insightful one. You could please upload our speaker for today, and please do well to connect with him on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I don't know if does anyone else still have any questions? And
so one other thing I also want to bring up, sorry,
okay.
If for any organization that wants to probably use information protection, right, it's important that Microsoft Purview is a suite of products, right? When you use the product in isolation, you don't get the full benefit or the value it's going to bring. So that is why everything is moved to Purview. When you use Purview in connection with information protection, put in DLP policy there, retention, so all of them are connected together, right? So I've seen organizations, they just want to use DLP policy, right? And they use DLP policy in isolation. They don't know that you can use information protection and then label your document, even without control access. And now you can use DLP and say, whenever the content contains this label, do not send it outside. I'm going to give you an example. So we have an organization that they are into they're into finance, and they have a lot of loanees, people they give loan to, and all of those documents. And then we had to classify their files, especially for credit card information and all of that. And now we didn't want to enforce any controls because people are worried about the controls. They just want to, see and monitor the movement of this sensitive information. We then said, okay, we're going to deploy the label. All right, we're going to classify your document first and then deploy label. And then we then use DLP policy and then say, when the content contains an information protection label, trigger an alert, notify the user, and notify the administrator. So this is where you use DLP policy in connection with information protection. We also have a case where they want to deploy governance, which is retention. And now we said, because these are label documents, you can create a label retention policy and say, if, call it retention label or label retention policy, if the content has this label, keep the document for longer period, right? We can also use it in connection with insider risk management policy. So IRM is where you decide internal user activity and see if there's any insider risk. You can use both DLP, adaptive protection, information protection, all connected together to tie these things together, and you have what we call a high quality compliance posture, a robust security, and a strong information protection setting. So if you want to go into that, let it be comprehensive, take it solution by solution, and then you're going to see the real benefit of Microsoft Purview. That's all I wanted to share and add to what I said before. Thank you very much, and over to you, Rafiah.
Yeah, thank you so very much, Precious, for that wonderful session. Please do well to check the recording for this session will be made available on Emmanuel Itoje's YouTube channel, and hopefully in the next session, Precious will be taking us through the DLP policies. Thank you all once again for joining in, and do have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everybody, and bye for now.
Bye. Okay, I think, okay, me. Okay.